And I like how it was tied directly to the upcoming.
So I think we're learning a little bit about what draws the crowd, though, right? Because
Well, I used to find you just
I wasn't gonna compete with the Davids. It's just you guys have me beat hands down attendance wise. You brought the crowd, and then I said, and today we're gonna talk about money, and everybody's like, all right.
Yeah.
Well, might as well be on our way then. It sounds like everyone who's going to join us is here. Oh, okay. Is Mary Jo coming?
I don't know what.
She was. You're right. She was here.
Oh, no, that's okay. Send me back when she's back. And those are two minutes.
All right. Everyone, I thought this was a humorous way for us to start. Just because I have met people who have been members of a church for 20 years, and they kind of hear these words floating around: assessment, operational budget versus ministry budget, endowments, capital expenditures, all of these things that are very, very important for our church in terms of us being able to continue to be the church. But in 20 years, we've done a lot of Bible studies, we've talked a lot of theology, but they still don't know what any of these things are. So periodically, we ought to talk about it. And we're going to record this so we can share it for anybody who's not in the room, that we can even say, hey, do you want to know about these things? Here's a handy video. So my plan is to just briefly address some of these things. What's the difference between an operational budget and capital expenditures? What's an assessment? What were pew rentals? What were pew rentals? Stewardship. We use words like stewardship. But today we were talking about a pledge drive. Anne was talking about a pledge drive. Are those the same? Are those different? How are they different? And so this will be an opportunity to just kind of talk about some of these things. Feel free to take notes if you'd like. Raise your hand, ask questions. Some of this may be very broad level that you already know, but you have a question about something that's deeper for you, and I'd be happy to pause this momentarily to dig into your questions. And I may not have the answer, but you know what? Then once the question's out there, then we know we can go find the answer, right? Sound good? So we'll go ahead and get started. Operational budget versus capital expenditures. But when we use these terms, when we're talking about our operational budget, what we're basically talking about is that line item budget that funds the operating of the church. So we're talking about paying staff, the electricity bill, doing maintenance, the light bulbs that need to be replaced, the vacuum that needs to be cleaned, all of these things, regular programs, so our feeding ministry, Revive Christmas baskets, our choral evensongs, anything that goes into the daily life and working of the church, which is different than capital expenditures. I know this is, for anybody who's experienced this in finance, and finance, it's way more complex than this. But generally, when we're talking about capital expenditures, we're not talking about the daily operating of the church. We're talking about occasional things, such as needing to build a new building, or needing to re-roof a building, or our new pipe organ is a great example of a capital expenditure. Getting a new pipe organ is not a regular part of our operating budget every year. This is a one-time thing. Our stonework, right? Those are great examples of capital expenditures that we still need to raise funds for and pay for, but it's not part of the daily life and work of the church. What's an assessment? Now, some of y'all, maybe everyone in the room was here when we talked a few weeks ago about the canons and constitution of the church. Remember that when we were talking about how the constitution of the church very much parallels the Constitution of the United States, how both were formed around the same time? And remember how we talked about how there's national level constitution and then there's state level constitutions. Illinois has a state constitution. Well, in that same way, there's national canons for the Episcopal Church, for all the Episcopal Church, and then there's also a constitution for the Diocese of Chicago. And so some of our rules, just like in the US government, how some rules are state laws and some rules are national laws, in the same way, some of our rules come from just our local constitution, and some come from the national constitution. And that gets to assessment. All these things in the government, right, in the United States government, all need to be funded, right? And how do they primarily fund all of these things at state, national, local levels? Through taxes, essentially, right? We tell people whether it's an income tax, which is a percentage of your income, or a state tax, which is, sales tax, which is a percentage of your purchases, or property tax based on the value of your property. But those things all go to fund these various operations. And the church works the same way. So we have the same structure in the church: national, state, local level, laws, executive, judicial, all going to be paid for. So generally speaking, and actually I was having a great conversation with somebody who's been here for years and years and did not know, for example, that the Diocese of Chicago does not pay for the cathedral, right? That day-to-day operating budget we talked about, the evensongs and the meal ministry and all those things, that's not paid by the Diocese of Chicago. Right? The funds actually generally go the other way. So the parish takes a percentage of what we have to support the Diocese of Chicago. All of the dioceses in the church pay a percentage of what they have to support the national church. And it's not that it doesn't go both ways, because there are instances of it going both ways, where, you know, if there's a crisis in some way, or some assistance or funding that needs to happen, the Diocese of Chicago will routinely go and help parishes in need financially. So whereas we're generally all paying a percentage to fund the diocese then also use those funds to support the parishes. That all makes sense? I mean, much in that same way that, say, we pay our income tax that goes towards assistance, like Medicare and Medicaid, which then go back down to help people. It's the same kind of way. This is based on those canons, or those constitutions we just talked about. So the National Constitution of the Episcopal Church asks all of the dioceses to take 15% of their revenues and contribute it to support the national church. The Diocese of Chicago's constitution, meanwhile, and it's 15%, it's something like 15% of anything above and beyond 200,000 in revenue. So if 200,000 is not taxed, right? It's the same as we have a floor in income taxes, right, where we don't tax people. So 200,000 or above, they ask for 15% of it to fund the national work of the church. Chicago, meanwhile, has a sliding scale, so the smaller the church is, the less of a percentage they're asked to pay, but it's either 11, 13, or 15%. So say St. James, for example, we're asked to pay 15% of our revenue, 15% of what we bring in to support the greater work of the Diocese of Chicago. Yeah?
Does that include total income, including, say, testamentary gifts that people leave in their wills, or is it just like pledges?
Well, that's good. That's a good question. That's why it's important to understand, like, what's operating budget, what's operating income. So people who are paying the funds that go to support the daily operating work of the church, 15% of that is given. So if we get like a one-time gift that's specifically to help install the new organ, capital expenditure, right? We don't have to give 15% of that, right? It's 15% of our regular operating budget. That's partly why it's very important when somebody gives a gift to the church, we understand what that gift is going to. If you're sustaining the daily ministries of the church and our daily operating, then a portion of that goes to support the diocese, as it should, right? We do want to support the diocese, right? But if you want to say you're specifically giving a $100,000 gift to feed the hungry, and then the Diocese of Chicago takes 15% of it, well, that's not what that's for, right? So it's very important we understand what gifts are for and how they're designated.
And Stephen,
Yeah.
I think we pay our assessment, and all parishes within the diocese are expected to, but not all of them do.
Right, right. That's true.
Nuance, right?
One thing that changed around, I think it was while Bishop Griswold was bishop, So time period wise, that puts you like 2000, I believe, around there. The Diocese of Chicago made the decision to make paying the assessment optional. As you would imagine, a lot of parishes then said, great, then we opt not to. Which is part of what's created the crisis
Yes.
in supporting the diocese. Now, they weren't just financially foolish, they did that because they were trying to help parishes that themselves were struggling, and that they didn't have the 11% to give. And rather than say, you didn't pay your assessment, therefore you're barred from diocesan convention, or we take your clergy away from you, or rather than there being punishment for not doing it, they said, we'll make this optional, please pay what you can, here's what we're asking for, but it's optional. Many parishes don't, some because they can't. Charitably, I say there probably are some that could be and aren't. But St. James, you're right, St. James does pay the entire 15%, and actually more. We actually contribute well more than the 15% we're asked to contribute in many ways, because we also then support the diocesan functioning of the cathedral, all the diocesan events that take all of the payroll and staff time and everything that all contributes to the cathedral. That's not even considered in the 15%. So I would argue to say we actually contribute above and beyond what we're asked to. And I'll say we're not the only ones. There are a lot of parishes that do participate in their entire assessment, but it is interesting to see the effect that making it optional has been.
Stephen,
Yes.
if I may ask, and maybe this is not when we were going to talk about this, but this right here.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding is that this was decided at diocesan convention, therefore it's not up to the bishop to reverse this, that it would have to be a motion through diocesan convention.
Right,
The
this-
entire diocese would need to vote on it to reverse it to go back.
Yeah, it would be an amendment, right? We'd have to have an amendment to the diocesan rules, essentially, yeah. I'm in on a lot of those inner conversations where, there are a lot of people that say, we don't want it to be optional anymore, it should not be optional. Knowing that the complexity in that is if you make it, if it becomes required again, what do you do with the parishes that can't do it? And what then happens to that? Is there punishment because they're financially not able to? There's people that talk about it will lead to parishes, if they have to start paying their assessment, if it becomes required again, they won't be able to afford a priest anymore. What does that mean for the parish that they have to give up their priest so that they can pay their assessment? So it's complex, but the conversation is ongoing about, it seems like we all agree optional is bad. We don't know what a better solution is. So it's ongoing conversation, but thank you, and you are correct, it would take, it would be something we, the people of the Diocese of Chicago, would decide. Democracy. All right, what were pew rentals? This is basically it, pew rentals. This was the way the church used to be funded in many places over the years. We talked about this a few months ago, where the standard way the church funded the ministry was to say, the members of our church, who are seated members of our church, paid their dues. They pay a pew rental in order to fund the ministries of the church. It sounds silly to us now that you'd have to pay to be able to have a seat in the church. It sounds silly to us now. But it was the way they figured out this is how members will support the parish, as opposed to what we do today, which is, say, pledging, right? And the Anglican Church, very early on, in the 1800s, I think it may have been around the 1800s, I have to go back and look at my old forum notes, but it was around the 1800s, I think it was, that the Episcopal Church early on said, we're getting less and less comfortable with this. We don't really like this idea that, like, the more wealthy you are, you get to sit in better seats, and the poor people have to sit in the back with the spiders and the bats, and we didn't like the message that was sending. We didn't like the message that we were sending that somehow God loves you more, or you're more welcome in the church if you can pay more. Lots of complicated theological issues with that. So we all agreed we're going to get rid of pew rentals, Again, the question then becomes, what do you replace it with? What's the better alternative? And that gets us to two words we use a lot, which is stewardship and pledge drive. And in a lot of places I've been, and here at St. James, we've often conflated these words, that stewardship has just become code word for pledge drive, give us your money, right? And what I want to make sure we had a chance to talk about is this idea of stewardship, being a good steward over the gifts that God has entrusted to us, which means using them well, right? A good steward over the church that's been entrusted us, which means taking good care of it, being a good steward of it. Stewardship is really, it's a year-round process of teaching, of showing gratitude, teaching people that, we're lucky to be here and to have what we have. And part of how we show we're grateful is by how we take care of it, how we maintain it, how we support it. That's the idea of stewardship in general. And one part of stewardship involves having an annual pledge drive, for example, which is teaching everybody we're going to have that operational budget we talked about. And every year when we're planning that operational budget, we need to know what we're working with. How much support is there? Will we get $2 million this year? Will we get $1 million this year? It means when we're planning our budget, can we do double or half? We don't know until we know what people are prepared to contribute. And so the pledge is simply an opportunity for people to say, here's my best guess, here's my intent. It's not an unbreakable promise. It's not something where if you don't pay it, collections agency will come after you. You won't get evicted from the church if you don't pay it. But it helps us to understand what we're aiming for, right? And it's always okay if somebody fills out a pledge card. I get this every year. If somebody fills out one of those pledge cards and says, I aim to give $2,000 this year. But you know what? I just had an unexpected medical expense. Or I just lost my job and I'm not going to be able to do it. There will be zero shame in that. We completely understand. This is life. That's how life works. You may also have gotten a raise and you decide, hey, I can actually give $2,400 this year. That would also be okay. But it's giving us an idea of what we're trying to work with as we're planning for the year ahead. The differentiating those kind of make sense? Just because years and years and years in the church, we tend to use those words like they're interchangeable. So we're trying to get away from that. If you hear me say stewardship campaign, feel free to kick in the ankles or something. It's pledge drive, because we're working on being clearer with our language. So given that, what then is the difference between this pledge drive we're talking about and this capital campaign we keep talking about? Remember that capital campaign prayer that we say every worship service? Are those the same thing? Well, if you're new to the Episcopal Church or you're new to St. James, they may very well seem like they're the same thing. Or it seems like, well, you're asking me to give to this, and you're asking me to give to this. Is this just your sneaky way of doubling your ask? Right? These are good questions. So now you'll be equipped to tell your friends, tell the members of the church. This pledge drive, as we said, this is that annual time where we're all saying, this is what I feel I can contribute. This is how I feel God is calling me to give this year, or what I'm able to do, and it helps us with that operational budget. The capital campaign is really more about those capital expenditures we talked about at the beginning. Remember, the new organ, a new roof, repairing the stonework. Not the daily operating costs, but really like one-time expenses that we need to raise money for because it's not part of the budget. So the capital campaign is your opportunity to promise to say, I want to support the church having its stonework repaired. I want to promise to support the church in having a new organ installed. And my gift to the capital campaign is what will support that, which is separate and beyond that annual pledge drive that's supporting the meals ministry and pastoral care, hospital visits, worship services. That's what's supporting that. And I'm going to need you all to go be knowledgeable acolytes now, to go out and make sure if you find somebody who doesn't know the difference between those, now you know, you can help the cause. Planned giving. Maybe you all know this already, but planned giving is basically, it's the phrase we use for saying, what you're planning. It's not your plan for what you're going to give in the pledge drive. It's not your plan for what you're going to give to the capital campaign. Planned giving basically is, it's a euphemism, right? It's what I plan to give after I die, right? Without acknowledging that it's ever going to happen. I'm not going to die, right? But it's acknowledging that you have an opportunity too to say, after I'm gone, and I've been left with all these things God has given to me. Yeah, I'm going to support my kids, support my grandkids, maybe give to my alma mater, give to the Boys and Girls Club. We all have to decide for ourselves what is a part of how we pass on what's left after we don't need it anymore. And a lot of people make a part of their will or part of their plan to give a portion to the church. St. James, which is, of course, wonderful because that is a lasting impact you have of how you can continue to support the church even after you're gone. That's really a gift of supporting the church for future generations to come. Yeah, John.
I'm going to sound like I'm stuck on this issue, but when somebody plans a gift, do you, like a lot of organizations want that person to let you know about it, do you include the present value of that money into your budget?
Oh, sure.
Looking forward?
Yeah, no, that's a great gift. That's a great question. That's why we're here. Every once in a while, we do get surprise bequests, right? Where we surprise, someone died and they left us $100,000. That's, of course, wonderful and amazing, and to have that be a surprise. It's also really nice to not have it be a surprise, right? To know that it's coming at some point, right? Not that we're hurrying you, right? We're not going to hurry you along in giving it. We want you to be here as long as possible. But that, again, so it wouldn't be part of the daily operating budget because we wouldn't be counting on it for a day. Generally, it would go toward, and we'll get to this, but it would go toward usually like an endowment, a fund that we would set up that would not be specifically for the day-to-day operations because we don't know what we can count. I had time for 2 quick answers? Maybe, real quick. I did have, for example, a man who told us that he was going to leave 50% of his estate to St. Stephen's after he died. And then when he died, his wife said, yeah, no, I'm not gonna, I don't like St. Stephen's that much. You're not getting any of the money, right? So it's good to know what we can count on as best as we can know to plan ahead, but understanding we don't know what we can count on for that. We also, when I was at St. Paul's, we made a large part of our capital campaign planned giving. So we had about $1 million of funds we had raised, but it was funds that people promised to give us after they were gone. And what we found out was like 10, 20 years later, a surprising number of people were still alive. And so they had promised these funds and we had expected to be able to use them on the building, but people weren't dying fast enough, and which is good, right? But we planned on that, and so that was a good learning experience, not to plan on getting that for that time because we want you to stay around. Don't be in a hurry to go anywhere. You probably all already know this, the difference between plate and pledge when we talk about this. That pledge is that promise to say, here's what I will be giving. Usually your pledge payment would come. It's a monthly check. Sometimes it's auto-deducted from your bank account. Sometimes you put it in a little envelope and put it in the plate, which makes it confusing, right? Because you're putting it in the plate, but it's your pledge, it's not your plate. Plate offering, what we really mean is that just that loose cash or checks that aren't part of anyone's promise, but they're just a visitor that's putting something in. They haven't made a promise. We don't count on this as part of the promise the same way we budget for this. We don't know what's going to come on this because it depends on who throws in 5 and who throws in a 20.
So when you make a pledge, does it
Yes.
matter? Is it significant to the operations when that comes in, or as long as, like, typically if they can rely on that to come in within that pledge year, is that?
No, that's a great question. That's a wonderful question. I will say as long as we're aiming for it because you said it's what you're aiming for, so we're counting it by the end of the year. It's not a cash flow issue. In terms of if we don't get it monthly, we're not going to be able to make payroll. In the same way that actually some churches, they really do need it in monthly installments to make payroll. So for us, it's not much of a cash flow issue. We have those folks that they just make one payment on December 31st, so that it's in for tax purposes, and we know we're gonna get 100% of their pledge check is gonna be on December 31st every year. We also have those folks that do it in twice a year, 6-month installments. I would say the only thing I would say that's important is, say you promise you're going to give $600. Don't just throw a loose 50 in the offering plate and say, well, I told you I would give you that, because we don't know that's your pledge payment. That's why it's helpful to have it in an envelope, or heck, even on a sticky note that says, this is Lance's 50, right? Like, this is my pledge, right? Just so we have a way of knowing that's what it is. But that's a great question, thank you.
I have a quick question.
Yes?
How do you massage the budget when you know, okay, let's say after the campaign, $1,000 is the total amount pledged.
Mm-hmm.
Realistically, you're probably not gonna get $1,000, are you?
Right, yeah.
How do you budget?
I would say personally, churches, when I've been more directly involved in the budgeting process as the rector, I always tended to aim for like 95%. That was usually pretty good. At the churches where I was, we would get about 95% of what people said they were going to give. So St. James, I mean, that would be a great Robert Black question. Say like, hey, on average, do we usually get what people pledge? We may get more than it. We may get more. So we have, as the pledge campaign goes, or I said campaign, pledge drive. As the pledge drive happens, we may find people are able to give more than they promised. I always, at St. Stephen's and at St. Paul's, usually aimed for our budgeting about 95%, and that was always pretty close.
So on those years when perhaps 95 or less percent comes in, is that when reserves?
Right, I mean, we have reserves. Yep, exactly. We have, like this endowment we're talking about, right?
To catch the difference between.
Yeah. Well, and this is part of that planned giving, part of those special one-time gifts when someone says, I want to create a fund that's going to, say, support that kind of thing. We can draw a little bit more out of our investments on a year where pledging went down, say the pandemic. At my church, at St. Stephen's, the year the pandemic hit, we maybe got 80% of what people pledged. A lot of people got laid off, a lot siloed at home, right? So, and we knew we had to draw a little bit more of our endowment that year to cover the difference. But then we've also had boom years. Actually, 2021, the next year, still pandemic, but the next year, we actually increased our pledging. We got more than we expected. And so we didn't have to draw as much out of the endowment. So it's very nice to have that sort of buffer. When we talk about a sustainable draw, this comes generally in nonprofits in the world. You want to draw about 4 to 5% out of your endowment. That's considered a pretty sustainable draw, where any more than that, and you start reducing the size of the endowment, right? So you want to be able to have it be something you can continue to draw from, but not shrink it, if that makes sense. And generally about 4 to 5% is usually considered pretty safe. Restricted funds, basically it's say John, you were bringing this up, say John, you're going to give a gift and say, I want this to support the organ. That means we can't then take that funds and then go use it for the meal ministry, right? Not that the meal ministry is not very important and it doesn't need the funds, but that's not why it was given to us. So sometimes funds come with a designated, this is what I want it to be used for, and we're not allowed to use it for other things. Actually, if you get back to that endowment, endowments usually have the rule, you're not allowed to touch the donation. You're only allowed to draw from the interest off of it. And so that's a frequent designation. And we honor those rules, which, as you can imagine, because if you didn't honor that, then the next person knows they can't trust that you're really going to use it for what he said, so why would I give you my funds when I can't trust you're going to use it how I said? So we honor that very seriously. We have a lot of funds that are just to support music. We have a lot of funds just to support choirs specifically. We have a fund that's specifically to support only secular music, non-church music at the cathedral. So that's specifically used for like when we do like the concerts outside, for example. Operational budget versus ministry budget. This is my very last point, which is good because I don't have enough longer. This is great. We're good on time. We've been talking operational budget, which is that line item. Here's how much the light bulbs cost when we go to the hardware store. Here's how much it costs to clean the floors. Here's how much it costs to pay for the candles, and line item by line item. What that doesn't tell us is what are those expenses actually going to support in the ministry life of the church? And that's really what a ministry budget is to say. The candles aren't for candles' sake. The candles are part of helping us worship, right? The fuel expense isn't buying gasoline, it's buying us the ability to drive down to the store to get socks, to give socks for homeless people, right? When you're paying my salary, you're not paying for me, you're paying for the pastoral care that I can do, and for leading us in worship, and for helping organize our outreach programs, right? It's the ministries those things are ultimately going. When you pay Jocelyn's salary, right? Jocelyn's salary goes to support so much of the ministry. All of it contributes towards ministry in the church. And so it's a different way of thinking about it. The reason I want to bring that up is because here's what the ministry budget looks like at St. James. It's very different than a line item by line item, the electric bill, right? Insurance payments. When you divide it up toward what portion of those things go to support what ministries, you get these 6 things. When I crunched the numbers on this, I found it was, my first takeaway was it was remarkably even from wedge to wedge. There's clearly not one wedge that's way bigger than any other. You've got about 20% of every, and another way of thinking about this is every dollar that you contribute, 20 cents of it goes to support the worship. 16 cents of it goes to support forming Christians. Things like what we're doing right now, or the Wednesday night Bible study, or Sunday school classes. About 17% of it is service, serving the world. Right? So that's any of our service projects for helping immigrants, for helping the homeless. About 16% toward fostering fellowship. Yes?
Can you break that out a little bit, because that's making me feel really uncomfortable as part of the welcome team, because that looks like I'm spending a lot of money. But what is incorporated in fostering fellowship?
Well, fellowship specifically thinking about like the hospitality, the food we have in the welcome center, when we have when we host the receptions after an evensong service, any of the things that aren't specifically like educational, but it's really about us being community to each other. Figure what else breaks down into that.
Obviously, newcomer lunches.
Newcomer lunches, right? But I mean, please, by no means, don't feel uncomfortable with it. Fostering fellowship is absolutely essential to the life of a church.
Yeah.
It's what incorporates new people into the life of our community. It's what feeds and sustains us. One of the major things I hear at St. James is I'm here for the people. I'm here for community. I'm here because I love them and they love me. That's an absolutely crucial part of it. And actually, I think it shows how important it is to us at St. James that we support it, right? So really, it's absolutely very important. I mean, the kids' Wednesday night meals, that's not only the meals, but the meals are a big part of what's fostered that these kids love each other. Like, they support each other, and and the parents that now have become friends with each other. And so absolutely so important. Yeah, but thank you for asking. That's great. About, as we said, 15% supporting the diocese, that's that. We were asked to support 15%, and I was very pleased to see when I crunched the numbers. This is actually probably a little low, but as you see, we're there where we're supposed to be. And about 14% for pastoral care as well. Which is, again, that's a great example of, you could say, well, what does pastoral care cost? Pastoral care doesn't cost anything. I mean, the hugest part of that is a portion of Lisa's salary and a portion of my salary to go and take the time that it takes to go out and do pastoral work, the time it takes to go and train other people to do pastoral work, our support of Bishop Anderson House, things like that. So,
Stephen,
yeah.
so this pie chart is on the back of our pledge drive brochure that everyone will see today. And after the 9 o'clock service, a woman that came up to me and said, "Where's the administration cost?"
And that's exactly what I get all the time, which is what is the administration cost? It's not administration for administration's sake. It's what the administration is doing.
And I gave her your answer, thank goodness
Yeah.
I knew it.
Right.
But she said, you know, everybody's got a suggestion on board. But
Right,
anyway, we need to put a footnote there or something, that's how we accounted for it. So, okay.
Fair enough, fair enough.
Supporting the diocese, I take it that probably doesn't include any extraneous expenses that we have for diocesan events?
Yeah, and I think that's probably why, if I crunch numbers a little bit more, it's actually probably even a little higher than this, because this is predominantly, this is our assessment that we pay to the
Actual,
diocese.
like, contribution.
In addition to taking into account the time Robert and Lisa and Jocelyn and I work on making diocesan bulletins for diocesan events, or serving as clergy, taking a Saturday to do those, right? So honestly, it probably is even a little higher than this, the more we dig into the numbers. This is one important takeaway I want everyone to have over the course of our time. Spread the word on this, because there is a rumor that goes around, and I don't know where it comes from, that the Diocese of Chicago pays for everything St. James does. And I don't know where new folks get that idea. I think it's because they don't understand how the structure is. So you're now all recruited to help spread the word. We do get some help from the diocese. We do get some assistance. It works out to be about 1% of our income.
And that's because we are the cathedral. If we were not the cathedral, we would not get it. Right?
That's occasional, since they help with the electricity bill. We calculate what the electricity bill is. Income we get from non-St. James members. We do get some non-St. James members who support. 97% of everything that goes into this and making this possible, 97% of it is only possible because of what St. James members contribute. That's why this is so essential. I mean, that's why the planned giving, the capital campaign, and right now our current pledge drive, that's why those are so essential. Because when I say we can't do it without you, we literally can't do it without you. The danger we push back against, and I really got to remember, the danger we push back against is new people who've been here 2, 3, 5 years. We say, we can't do this without you, but they look and they say, you've been doing it for 189 years without me just fine. Right? I mean, so they really, yes, we've been doing it without you just fine, but it's because people who came before you supported it, right? And now we need you to step into that role of supporting it as well, so that then the next generation beyond you that comes can come in and say, wow, look at the amazing ministries of St. James. Clearly you're doing it fine without me, right? It really is important for us to educate people to understand. When we say we can't do it without you, it's because we really can't. We do need the people of St. James to support making the ministries of St. James possible. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
As you continue to have questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm here for you to answer questions. God bless you all for being here.
I think a lot of people who are new especially assume because it's